All right, let's start here. Number one, I did not expect to be making a video this soon about X-Men 97. I just made my wow, X-Men 97 is amazing video. People liked it. You guys watched it. That's great. I kind of figured maybe I'd do a check-in mid-season. Maybe if something really specific came up that I was like, oh, that's just like this thing I've always been talking about, I would do that. And then I'd come back at the end and say it's amazing. And maybe even another video after that saying, here's where I think the series will go in the future. Hopefully get the second season. I don't know. I got to assume it's a huge hit and other people like me are buying all the action figures and toys and all that stuff. So I think this is going to keep going. But after watching episode 3, I could not help but make a little tiny video just because there's a couple of things that I think we need to talk about. Now, I am going to spoil what happens in the episode. I will kind of maybe half spoil things in the future based on kind of describing, hey, this is what this story usually does, and then this character will come back, let's say. I'm not going to go into too much details. This isn't going to be about speculating. This is just going to be about kind of comparing some of the beats of the stories. Because this episode, Fire Made Flesh, did a lot of interesting things, including one very important thing, is it followed way faster than I was expecting a story from the comics. And it made a bunch of changes, obviously, because of where the X-Men are at this point in the story and because of what characters exist and don't exist and stuff like that. But I loved it personally. I mean, I've always been a huge fan of these characters in this storyline. I always thought this would be something fun to explore in a show like this. And I always knew what we would get would not be just like exactly like what was in the comics, mostly because of how those characters are dressed, but also the story. It's a longer story. And personally, I thought this episode we just got, this Inferno episode, would be the season finale. Like, I thought the last 3 episodes of season 1 would be like Inferno Part 1, Inferno Part 2, Inferno Part 3. I have a feeling a lot of people thought that. Because sure, the end of episode 2, second Jean Grey shows up and then it's like, oh, there's 2 Jeans. But I could see a version of this show where episode 3 in the beginning, they find out like, okay, so you're the real one and you're the clone, but we don't know what the deal is. And then Madeline and the baby just disappear. And we don't hear about them for a while. Scott and Jean are looking for them. And then in the finale, we find out she made a deal with the devil or some limbo demon. And now everything's hell. Like, that seemed totally possible. So am I like disappointed that that isn't what the whole series ended up being? Not necessarily, because we don't know what the finale is going to be. We know what the titles of some of these episodes are called, but that doesn't give us that much information. Even this episode wasn't called Inferno, it was called Fire Made Flesh. So you could look at that from the beginning of the season and say, oh, that is probably going to be an episode connected to the Inferno storyline. But you didn't know that was going to be the episode where they like did it. And okay, just very briefly, Inferno, some differences, really important ones. One, Madeline Pryor does not think she's Jean Grey, usually. I thought in the end of episode 2 when Madeline Pryor, Jean, makes that scowl kind of, or like furrows her brow a little bit. You're like, oh, she knows there's a second Jean. This is part of a plan. And then we find out she did not know that. She thought she was the real Jean and she had like, you know, fake memories and stuff. So right off the bat, that was surprising. This is another thing I'm not too sure about, so I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments. How much time has passed between the end of the last season of X-Men the Animated Series and then now in like X-Men 97? Because there's a couple things that happen, right? We just got the professor's death certificate in episode 1 or 2. So like that seemed like a pretty fresh wound. A lot of the things that happened seemingly pretty recently, which must have meant that immediately this Jean got pregnant, which I guess means that pretty quickly his baby starts growing in Jean 2. So like that's interesting. And we still don't know, and maybe won't ever find out exactly when Jean Grey was switched. But unlike Secret Invasion, it seems intentional, like a way to mess with these characters as opposed to something that they are going to figure out. They just haven't decided on yet. So right off the bat, the idea that Madeline thinks that she's the real Jean is interesting and a new thing. Second thing, she has powers that are like activated by Sinister, but are powers she has. And I think this is fine, right? Because that's usually how she works. However, here's the order of events. Madeline Pryor exists, does not have superpowers, then gets some superpowers. So like gets Jean Grey's telepathy. Then she makes a deal with a devil or a demon or whatever from Limbo to bring demons and hell on Earth so that she can get her revenge or whatever it is she wants to do. So in that version of the story, she's the Goblin Queen. She calls herself that, but it's because she is in charge of actual goblins. Like, it's not just a theming she has. This is an army that was given to her by another demon goblin guy. Now, in this version of the story, she gets her powers. Mr. Sinister's like, you've got powers. You're a bad person. Then she goes evil and decides to invent all the hell stuff herself and calls herself the Goblin Queen. Like, I think it's just kind of funny how they did some of these things backwards, right? In this episode, the end of the episode, she's like, you call me Madeline Pryor now. It's like, why? Why would you name yourself that specifically? Does that mean anything to you? In the comics, like, Sinister named her that, and he named her that specifically because Pryor was supposed to mean, like, before. Like, you're that character from before. And I don't know why Madeline, but that part doesn't matter as much. But here, it's like she just picks this name, and it's like, okay, I mean, that's a fine name. That is the name that I expected you would take. But like that and Goblin Queen, it's like she read the comics and was like, oh, that's what my character should be called. Now, I loved everything we were getting with Goblin Queen. First of all, I think that the costume, and I have the toy here, like I just was so impressed with how they took what is like one of the, I would say for sure, skimpiest costumes in all Marvel comics and turned it into something that both maintained like the spirit without actually being so revealing that it couldn't be shown to children. Because that does get a little tricky with some X-Men stuff, especially this, really this. Like even this figure is more conservative than the actual one because I believe these legs are like shown. She has like the big thigh-high boots or whatever in the actual show. So like that's interesting like detail. I love that her skin is like pink. Like I don't know if this is coming through here, but like compared to say, I don't know, Jean Grey, for example, they do not have the same skin tone. And that's interesting. I think that the way they animated Madeline Pryor was incredible. Like I loved how much she was moving around, how much she was like taking control of the situation. She was very authoritative, pointing. They gave her a magical girl Sailor Moon transformation into Madeline Pryor. Like I think we have known for a while, I believe that anime was a big influence for this version of the show, so X-Men 97. And like, you know, we've seen the fight scenes and like certain ways they've animated things where like they'll have a character come real close to the camera so you get one frame of their face real close and they pull back and do a thing. Like that reminds me of anime stuff. This is so anime-y. I don't think anybody could miss it. I also think just like the voice acting for this character was super fun. Like I think we have a new Jean, right? This is not the original Jean. Apparently original Jean does the voice for Val Cooper, which is cool. But I think the way that they're doing it, they had a very reserved kind of new voice for Jean that I thought felt like Jean. And then when she goes into Goblin Queen mode, it is completely different. And I love that. Also like that her power signature was green now. Like that was a cool way to visualize that. And it had like a green crackly effect. It looked kind of uneven and dangerous, which I thought was great. And it's not just that she was evil. Madeline Pryor used whatever it is, reality warping powers that she kind of borrowed from Jean Grey and kind of borrowed from Sinister to turn the house into hell on earth. She didn't do this with the help of any of the demons. She just did it. But she did that by like, you know, you open the elevator and there's just a demon in the elevator, which I imagine has to be a callback to the elevator that eats a family in the Inferno comic, which is something that I remember very, very vividly, because it's pretty funny. And we also got like evil fantasies, things that I guess she could read your mind and like figure out that this is what you're afraid of. But like we got the scene where Rogue and Magneto were like hooking up and then they melted. And the pose that they use was the pose on the cover of that issue when those characters were touching when they were in the Savage Land. So like the fact that we got all the way there was crazy. Also, I feel like that must mean that Remy's kind of reading too far into this, right? It can't be. I mean, it could, because who knows? But I would imagine now it's going to be something else about him helping her master her powers or something like that. But it's not going to be like they're just hugging or cuddling or something. Not that I think, you know, I think Remy, sometimes they play him a little bit more jealous and whatever, but I do think he's a somewhat modern man who wears his crop tops. I think he can understand the situation she's in. Magneto seems more or less respectful, kind of, maybe. I don't know what his deal is, but anyway, other things that were interesting in this episode. Morph and Wolverine, they're just banging, right? Like they're just having sex on the regular. That is a thing that we have never seen, but like we have to assume is happening. And I'm not saying that because Morph is non-binary here or anything like that. I'm saying it because of the way that the locker room interaction happens. Morph doesn't know that Wolverine is a monster, right? Like that's something that the demon is doing. But they see a Wolverine that is showering and make a face like, oh, you know what it's time for. Now I assume what they wanted us to think was, oh, this is going to be one of their little pranks. But like, I don't know, man. That is not the way that prank starts. That's the way that prank starts in pornography, but not in real life. It kind of reminds me how Wolverine's sad. In the second episode, Morph throws him the beer, and then they turn into Sabretooth and make a face like, hey, are we gonna do this? And like, I don't know, maybe Morph is in, you know, doing it in like a romantic way, and Wolverine's just like wrestling Sabretooth for fun. Like they're reading different things. Like maybe they're getting different things out of this, but I don't think that's what it is. I think we're supposed to assume they're doing it. And I love that Morph is just willing to antagonize everybody. Like Gambit in this situation, as far as he knows, is getting cheated on by Rogue or something. And Morph isn't like, hey man, that's crazy. They're not like a good friend, but they're also not like, hey, your girlfriend's probably hanging out with Magneto over there. They go to the computer and read all the things that are like, by the way, your girlfriend's cheating with you here and here and here and here and here. Look at you, you sad little loser, and here and here and here. Like, I'm surprised Morph survived that encounter with Gambit. Speaking of Morph, I love that we got into more of the Sinister backstory. I think that's a lot of fun. But I do think, so one of the things that's interesting about Morph, what they're doing here, is Morph is in episodes. Their powers are being manifested by them turning into other X-Men characters. I assume that means these are other X-Men characters they have seen. So what you can read from that is these are characters that exist in universe, right? And a lot of them are characters that in the X-Men the Animated Series we had seen, right? They turn into Blob in the first episode. They turn into Angel in the first episode, or Archangel, but you know, that guy. So like those two were in the X-Men the Animated Series. And I would say they probably looked around the same as they do now. Episode 2, we get Psylocke. I am not sure if she was in the original Animated Series. And if she was, I don't know if she looked like that. And then we get Deathstrike. She was probably in the original Animated Series. And we get Colossus. Colossus is interesting because he is wearing his X-Men costume. Now again, I don't want to read too much into this, but I do think that this would kind of suggest, because I'm sure they thought about this, that these are costumes that Morph did not just make up off the top of their head. And like that means that Colossus has been on the X-Men wearing his traditional Colossus costume. And already I'm like, that's pretty crazy. But then we get Spiral, again, a character I'm pretty sure they have interacted with in the past. And then we get Magic. He turns into little Magic, little Illyana in her New Mutants costume, and then turns into the Darkchild version of Magic. Now, Illyana shows up in at least one of the Colossus episodes, maybe two, because she's his little sister he saves from a tractor in Russia. She does not join the New Mutants. She does not have any superpowers. She doesn't have a sword. Like, we don't get that version of her at all. She definitely doesn't do any of the Darkchild stuff. I assume this is mostly because that character and that story are tied to Limbo, and Madeline Pryor is tied to Limbo, so they wanted to throw that in here as like a fun little thing. However, like, Morph knowing who she is suggests that Magic, as the child Magic, the New Mutant, was on the X-Men at some point in her New Mutants X-Men outfit. And she had gone through the Darkchild stuff, which makes sense, because if she's like adult Magic, that means she has lived in Limbo, kind of. I don't know exactly what the story's going to be. Now, I've heard that we might see Magic later in like her actual character, which I think would be great. But again, this goes back to how much time has passed between the finale of the animated series and the beginning of 97, because like, it seems like a lot of stuff has happened. Colossus joined the team, he got a uniform. Magic joined the team, she got a uniform. She went to Limbo. They both left. I don't know what happened to them. So it's just pretty crazy, honestly, that we saw that as a humongous Magic fan. As someone who will, you know, struggle through that new video game that's Overwatch but Marvel stuff because Magic is in it. Like, I'm thrilled for her, and I like that Sunspot is here. So we're kind of slowly assembling the New Mutants. And like I said, Cannonball was in the original show. I'm pretty sure Wolfsbane was in the original show. Don't remember Danny, and I'm gonna guess Karma wasn't. But like, we've got some New Mutants there, so maybe that's what they're gonna do. And that's very interesting. Also, the fact that Sunspot was here, he like shows up and he's like hanging out, watching TV or something. I assume this episode starts where the last episode ended, and if that's the case, Sunspot was not there. Which kind of makes me think that like maybe some of these things have been moved around a little bit in the plot. I don't know, because it does feel like they did want to go straight from Birth of Nathan to this. So like, I don't think too many things got moved around, because I would imagine Roberto coming back after he left in episode 1 and being like, I don't want to be a mutant, and then just like being there would be a story thing. And maybe we'll get it in the future, but I doubt it. Speaking of characters that we know existed in universe that weren't here for this, I would say the most significant character that was not here for Inferno was Alex, Scott's brother, Havoc. He is in the animated series at least once, maybe twice. He was in the X-Men versus X-Factor episodes. We see his version of X-Factor. Now, I don't remember if in those episodes he's like, hey, by the way, Scott, it's me, your brother. Like, they talk about that at all. And in the comics, it's important. Madeline Pryor is married to Scott when Jean Grey is thought to be dead. Scott just does not want to do this. Like, he kind of does, but they get married and they move away, and then the X-Men start doing stuff. He's like, oh man, I wish I was doing X-Men stuff right now. And then Jean Grey comes back from the dead, and he's like, hey, Madeline, I just gotta go check on something real quick, so I'll be right back. And then she finds out what's going on and leaves him. But she ends up syncing up with the other X-Men. They all seem to die, except Roma brings him back to life, and they live in the Outback. This is the Outback era. She's there with Havoc. They start a relationship. When she goes all evil, when she goes all Goblin Queen, Havoc is there at her right hand. They're going on dates and stuff. And I swear, like, if you look at a picture of Madeline Pryor and you're like, man, that's pretty skimpy. You look at a picture of Alex, you're like, no, that's skimpy. Like, it was an equal opportunity skimp session over there. Nobody was wearing clothes. Now, it's funny because Madeline like comes back every so often. I don't know about every so often, but she came back recently, and the vibe across the team was like, oh, we got to check on Alex. He's going to make some mistakes. Like, somebody's got to make sure he doesn't call her because he just got over her. Like, he's like that one friend of yours who just keeps getting back together with his ex, and you're like, you probably shouldn't though. But yeah, so I was kind of bummed that Havoc was not around for this, but we do get a little bit in this episode of Wolverine and Jean having this connection, and then Madeline just leaves, and like, she's cool. She's like, maybe not fully cool, but like, she's not evil at the end of the episode. I wouldn't be surprised if they change the Havoc story and just give all of that to Wolverine, so he falls in love with Madeline Pryor, decides to, you know, pursue her. I don't know. I think that could be kind of interesting, and I just think like part of what is so great about the X-Men is all the social justice stuff. And part of what's great about the X-Men is firing laser beams and doing backflips and stuff. But a big part about what's great about the X-Men is the soap opera. And this Madeline Pryor love triangle could be so much fun. Another thing, you may be wondering, wait, is that how Cable goes into the future? Like, Bishop's just like, oh, I'll take him. It's cool. No problem. I was just going to go to the future anyway. No, it's similar. Instead of getting the techno-organic virus from Mr. Sinister, little baby Nathan gets it from Apocalypse. And those characters are connected. And like, Nathan was a weapon kind of designed by Sinister to kill Apocalypse. So it's like they've always been, you know, intertwined. But he gets from Apocalypse. And then a character called Ascani, I believe. I can't remember what her deal is, but she's from the future and she can time travel. And she's like, I will take baby Nathan to the future and we will save him from the techno-organic virus, but I can never bring him back. And Scott's like, man, that stinks, but I guess we got to do it. And they do, and everything's great. I think it was so funny watching people last week enjoy Scott and watch Scott do cool stuff and like land, do a superhero landing and say, bring him the forecast. Love that all. And people would say, a lot of people were saying this like, man, why don't we love Scott Summers? What have they been doing? They've not been doing him justice because he is such a cool character. And I didn't say this, but I was like, well, you know, he does have some problems. He kind of sucks sometimes. And this is one of the ways that he sucks. He is not great with women. Specifically, this Madeline Pryor relationship, like in the comics, is way worse. Jean shows up and he lies to Madeline, disappears, and then Madeline disappears and he's like, oh, well, I guess I gotta go do X-Men stuff again with my original girlfriend. Oh, I'm so sad. And he also like cheated on Jean with Emma Frost very famously. It was like psychic cheating, but still like he knew what he was doing. I think it is so funny how Scott in this episode is like, little baby Nathan, I promise you, because I love you so much, I would never ever abandon you like my father did because it was the worst thing you could do and I'll never do it. All right, goodbye, I'm gonna go. Like, just leaves. And a couple people online and like people I knew were like, man, Scott Summers sucks. And it's like, yeah, he kind of does. That's part of the whole package, right? He's a cool guy and does lasers. He's a great leader. He cares about the X-Men and all that. But sometimes he's not a good guy. And it's great. And it's part of why the X-Men are so great. Again, the soap opera thing. It's awesome. Man, this Madeline Pryor is so good. Would I have liked to see like the season-long arc of Madeline Pryor? Sure. But I think there's plenty of room for them to do cool stuff, and like she can come back and be a good guy and do whatever. Like, we don't know. They could do a lot of different things with her now. Other things that were interesting. Beast did 69 to Wolverine when they were jumping through the air. That was kind of interesting. I do like the Beast used the word Inferno, just so that this can have been the Inferno episode. I think I love when Magneto throws the chandelier at her. That was pretty funny. I like how he calls her a brimstone clone. I love that she got to say the word Inferno. Like, we had the word Inferno a couple times, which was good. Like, I remember when we first heard they were going to do an Inferno thing, I was so happy. And while this wasn't like the full Inferno storyline and whatever ripped exactly from the comics, like, it was campy, it was soap opera stuff, there was a bunch of weird monsters and magic, and I don't know, can't ask for much more. I am super into this show. Also, we obviously had the tease at the end of last episode with Storm and Forge. Pretty sure that means that the next episode we're going to do some life-death stuff, which is a story where Storm and Forge hang out after she's depowered and learn some things and stuff. I'm guessing that's what's going to happen because we have seen the titles for the next episode, and it is something / life death part 1. So we're going to get a little bit of life death. Seems like it's going to be like the bumper on these next couple episodes. And I think life death is a great Storm story. I think it's going to be very interesting. And I also think this is one spoilery thing. I'll tell you the title of next week's episode, and I don't even remember it. So I'll just tell you like what the vibe of it is. I'm pretty sure next week is the Mojo episode, and it's some sort of like video game something or other. So that'll be fun. But yeah, I was super happy with Inferno. I am just loving this series. Like, I know I said in my one video, like, I wish there was an X-Men that was just for kids, and I think that's still true. And I think after watching this and seeing how much this is connecting with people, adults and children, but like adults, it reminds you how much this connected to you when you were a kid. I think this is just like, it's a no-brainer. Make some X-Men show or something. Make Academy X. That is, you know, it's so easy. But yeah, so I hope everybody else is enjoying it. Like and follow and stuff, all the stuff you do to videos, do it to this video. And we will do more videos maybe. And I mean like a Mojo video, especially because like I had talked about Mojo a lot in my Deadpool 3 pitch. Like, I'll probably end up making a Mojo episode as well. So I hope you guys enjoy it, and I'll see you next time.